Welcome to Nutrition Rounds with Dr. Neal Barnard, the podcast for anyone interested in learning about plant-based nutrition through an evidence-based approach. Every week, we share insights and interviews with physicians who are leading experts in nutrition and health. Whether you've been plant-based for many years or are still searching for the perfect diet, Nutrition Rounds will inspire and empower you to live your healthiest life backed by science. Now here's your host, Dr. Neal Barnard MD. Hi guys, and today welcome to a very, very special episode of Nutrition Rounds. Today's really special because Neal Barnard is a physician who is the president of Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And it was through Neal and his work at PCRM that I started to learn about plant-based nutrition when I was a medical student. And it really influenced the way I started to treat my patients and the way I started to view healthcare in general. So Neal has contributed greatly to and shaped the way that I practice as a physician. When I started to learn, I've been vegan for a really long time, but when I started to learn about what PCRM was doing and what Neal was doing to help reverse things like hypertension and improve, put diabetes into remission, get people off their medications through plant-based diet, I was just so blown away that this wasn't something that was being taught in my medical training. And I really utilized PCRM as a huge source for my nutrition education to fill in those holes while I was in my medical school and residency and fellowship training. So Neal's been a really, really, really huge part of my shaping of my medical career and the way I am as a doctor today. So I can't thank him enough for how much he's done and how much it's changed the way I've treated my own patients and the way I view healthcare as a whole. So I just wanted to tell you guys Neal's background. And I know I've been trying to cut down on the intros a little bit the last season and make them a little shorter and more brief. But I don't want to skimp today on Dr. Barnard's intro because he's done so much. And this, interview with Dr. Barnard, who's a friend of mine and such an inspiration to me, really means a lot to me. So I want you guys to hear about everything he's done before we get started with the interview. So Neal Barnard is an adjunct associate professor of medicine at the George Washington University School of Medicine in Washington, D.C., and he's president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. He's led numerous research studies investigating the effects of diet on diabetes, body weight, chronic pain, and he also did a groundbreaking study of dietary interventions in type 2 diabetes funded by the National Institute of Health that paved the way for viewing type 2 diabetes as a potentially reversible condition for many patients. Dr. Barnard's authored more than 90 scientific publications, 20 books for medical and lay readers, and is the editor-in-chief of the Nutrition Guide for Clinicians, a textbook made available to all U.S. medical students. As president of the Physicians Committee, Dr. Barnard leads programs advocating for preventative medicine, good nutrition, and higher ethical standards in research. His research contributed to the acceptance of plant-based diets in the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, and in 2015, he was named a fellow of the American College of Cardiology. In 2016, he founded the Barnard Medical Center in Washington, D.C., as a model for making nutrition a routine part of all medical care. Working with the Medical Society of the District of Columbia and the American Medical Association, Dr. Barnard's authored key resolutions now part of the AMA policy, calling for a new focus on prevention and nutrition in federal policies and in medical practice. And in 2018, he received the Medical Society of District of Columbia's Distinguished Service Award, and he has actually hosted 4 PBS television programs on nutrition and health. Originally from Fargo, North Dakota, Dr. Barnard received his MD at George Washington University School of Medicine and completed his residency there as well. He has done so much in this space and has taught all of us so much about plant-based nutrition. And he's a wonderful human, a compassionate, lovely person, and good friend of mine. So I hope you guys really enjoy this episode. It's truly one of my favorites. Hello, and we are on Nutrition Rounds with someone that I am so excited to have on the podcast. It's been like a year in the making. He's one of my favorite physicians, but also one of my favorite human beings, a friend of mine, Dr. Neal Barnard. Dr. Barnard, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, it's great to be with you today. Thank you so much.
Neal, you've been highly requested from everyone, of course, since I started this. And I'm just so excited to discuss with you the work you've been doing and your book coming out, because I know that I personally get asked a lot of questions on this topic. So if you want to just start out with talking about the work you've been doing in general, for this book and this project that's coming out for everyone that, doesn't know what to expect and what's coming.
Well, I guess like everybody, I've been well aware that foods affect all kinds of aspects of health. They affect our weight. They affect our cholesterol levels. They affect our risk of diabetes. They affect cancer. All of these things. But what I was perhaps not prepared for is that there is a huge range of conditions that are affected by food, and those are all the ones where hormones dial them in. For example, thyroid conditions can obviously thyroid hormone is integral to many aspects of health, and thyroid hormone is affected in many ways by the foods that we eat. But what actually started me off on this whole thing was I got a phone call from a young woman who had terrible off the scale menstrual cramps. And that is something that people treat with ibuprofen and hormonal treatments. But I happened to, just by complete mistake, discover that foods could be absolutely decisive there. And this was 2 decades ago. We did what I think is probably the first and only randomized trial on a dietary intervention for menstrual cramps using a plant-based diet. And that's because that worked so well and because it had a huge number of ramifications, I just thought patients need to know about this, but their doctors need to know about this before they are suggesting more heroic treatments.
It's absolutely true. And especially because, I read your intro and everyone listening to this is familiar with your unbelievable work and all of the work that Physicians Committee has been doing. And you've been dedicated to this space for a long, long, long time. And you've produced so much research that I myself have integrated into my patient care. And I think that that's fascinating, especially because you discovered it kind of on incident and then you did an RCT for it. And so is that kind of what motivated you to do a book? Because I want everyone to know that you have this great book coming out all about how you can use lifestyle modification and plant-based nutrition and vegan diet to help with all different kinds of hormone disorders.
Great. Thanks. It's called Your Body in Balance. And the idea is that our bodies are not in balance very often. We eat foods that lead us astray. Yes, you're right. We've done all manner of research studies. We were funded by NIH to study the hormone insulin and how it can be modified by food choices that we make in the case of type 2 diabetes. We've done all kinds of other studies. But in this particular case, I was sitting at my desk. The phone rang, and it was a young woman. And her mother was a doctor in the other part of the United States. And she said, "You got to call Dr. Barnard. He'll help you." So I said, what's the matter? And she said, "I can't get out of bed. I've got such terrible cramps. I've got to get on a plane tomorrow. What do I do?" And so I thought, well, I can give you painkillers for a couple of days. But it occurred to me that we have known since the 1990s that estrogen levels, female sex hormones, can be modified by food. And it started out with women with breast cancer would be enrolled in clinical trials, or healthy women who hoped not to get breast cancer would join clinical trials, where the researchers would, for example, increase the fiber content of their diet, showing that would reduce estrogens just a little bit. And that's good because that's going to reduce the likelihood of breast cancer. Or they would pump up the fat content of their diet, and that would increase estrogens, and that would be part of the problem. So I thought, well, what are menstrual cramps? The endometrial lining of the uterus thickens up every month because the uterus is the most optimistic organ in the body. Every single month, it is convinced that we're going to get pregnant. So the endometrium gets ready. It thickens up. But 3 weeks later, the disappointed uterus discovers that we're not pregnant. And so the amount of estrogen starts to diminish. And over the next several days, the endometrium disintegrates. As it does that, it releases maladjusted chemicals called prostaglandins that trigger cramps, and they get into the bloodstream and they give you headaches and make you feel rotten. So anyway, she's calling me up and she's asking for painkillers, and I'm happy to do it. But I thought, okay, I asked her if she would like to try an experiment for the next 4 weeks, and that was no animal products and really low fat diet. And she said, I'll give it a try. And of course, what I'm doing is I'm making sure that everything she eats has lots of fiber and is extremely low in fat. She called me back 4 weeks later and said, this is the most amazing thing. Her period had arrived, 0 symptoms. And she stuck with it and found that this was her cure. And I thought, well, that was good, but we need to do a research study. So we did a randomized crossover trial where, working with my colleagues at the Georgetown University Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, we brought in a large group of women. They all had cramps. Half of them went on a low-fat, completely plant-based diet. The other half got a supplement, in quotes. It was really effectively a placebo. And what we showed was that as their periods approached, first of all, their PMS was less. And by that, I mean physical changes like water retention and bloating. They didn't last as long. They weren't as profound. And then mood effects were reduced. But then what really counted was that the pain that they might have had did not last as long, and it was a much lower intensity. It varied. The effect varied from one woman to another, but in some cases it was just flat out a cure. And so I thought, well, that's good. But in the course of this study, which showed that maybe it's not all ibuprofen, maybe you can change your lunch, there was another door opened. And it was opened by a young woman who was in the study. And we asked all of the participants to avoid any hormonal medications, because that would goof up our study. It would be a confounder. And that meant you couldn't use birth control pills. You had to use some, if they were sexually active, we asked them to use some other contraceptive method. And one of the women said, don't worry about me. My husband and I gave up the idea of having a family a long time ago. We both have been evaluated. It's not him. It's me. I don't ovulate properly. I'm infertile. So we don't use contraception. The second month that she was on the plant-based diet, she came into the research center and she said, I got bad news and I got good news. And I said, what is that? Well, the bad news is I'm dropping out of your study. The good news is I am pregnant. What happened was, simply by making these simple diet changes, plant-based diet, keeping oils low, you're changing the estrogenic milieu of the body, so she was able to ovulate again. And I several years later, I was lecturing in a different city. I didn't realize that she had moved to that town. She came to my lecture with her 3 kids.
Oh my God.
And so anyway, so this percolated in my mind that we can use foods not to necessarily treat a disease, but to bring the body back into balance so that the diseases just are irrelevant. So it's sex hormones, sex hormone binding globulin. A globulin is a protein, and it's a big protein. I think of it as the aircraft carrier for estrogen and testosterone, meaning that in your bloodstream, as long as estrogen is attached to SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, it's inactive. It's not doing anything. So we found that a plant-based diet increases SHBG.
Increases. Okay.
Yes. And that's good. That means it's still there, but it's inactive until you need it. But the effect of fiber is a little different. Your liver filters your blood, and one of the many things that the liver pulls out of the bloodstream is estrogen. Estradiol, estrone, estriol. Your liver will pull that estradiol out of the blood, and it sends it through the bile duct, this little tube that leads into the intestinal tract. So the estrogen is pulled out of the blood by the liver. It goes through this bile duct into the intestine, and then fiber grabs a hold of the estrogens and it carries it away with the waste. You are literally flushing away estrogen. However, here's the problem. Let's say your lunch was a cheese omelet or a salmon fillet. These are animal products. They're not plants. They have 0 fiber. And so in your intestinal tract, the estrogens still arrive, but there is no fiber for them to attach to. And so they end up being reabsorbed back into the bloodstream, and they're active again. So we call that enterohepatic circulation. Entero means intestine, and hepatic means the liver, like hepatitis. So if you have a lot of fiber in your diet all of a sudden, then when the liver pulls the estrogen out and puts it into the digestive tract, you've got fiber to carry all that estrogen away. And the amount of estrogen in your blood, it's still there, but it's reduced a little bit so that instead of having this storm of sex hormones, you've got the amount that nature thought you were going to have, and that allows the cramps to diminish. So at the end of the month, instead of the endometrial lining having been thicked up into a gargantuan blanket, making these prostaglandins that cause pain, you just get a mild thickening that is normal for you, and then it goes away in mild menstrual flow, no symptoms. That's the idea.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really interesting. The mechanism of that is fascinating. So what's the mechanism by which plant-based diet increases the SHBG?
I have not figured that out, and I don't know if anybody knows, but we've just seen that it does. And researchers at Tufts University did a whole group of wonderful experiments. They brought in 48 women, something like that. And they had them live in the laboratory. And so they could control their breakfast, lunches, dinners, everything. And they found several things. If they fed them more fattier foods, their estrogen levels went up. If they fed them fiber, their estrogen levels went down. If they combined the two, low fat, high fiber, that worked even better. And so pretty soon it became very, very clear. The problem was, you're never taught this in medical school. Women never hear it. If they've got cramps, they go to the store and they'll buy Midol or they'll buy ibuprofen, and it never says on the label, wait a minute, what did you have for breakfast? And I'm not suggesting that there's not a role for painkillers. There is. But what I am saying is that if we're on a healthier diet, we may not need them.
That's really, really interesting and a really good point, because definitely the entire mechanism makes sense. And you did a randomized control trial with regards to cramps and show that it improved. So it's definitely, for anyone listening, that's a provider, a tool to use in your toolbox for any of your patients. So, I have started to look at your book, and you have so many. I mean, this book is so needed. You've covered so many topics that I get asked about all the time. Hormones are not my expertise, and I'm so glad you addressed it, because the literature you reference and the cases you present are fascinating. So I wanted to touch on a few things that I'm constantly asked about that you've actually answered in your book, and I think that are going to be super helpful. We can stick with women's health for now and start with breast cancer. I think you had a really, really, really interesting section on breast cancer, and I was hoping if you could, the first and foremost kind of myth to dispel is the one that I'm constantly asked about soy being dangerous for women with breast cancer because of isoflavones, which have a chemical structure that's vaguely similar to testosterone or estrogen in people. And it's an unnecessary myth. But if you could just talk about the research you did and what you have in your book with regards to breast cancer, I would love it.
This is so important because, as you know, the statistics on breast cancer are frightening. It's 1 in 8 women gets it. And if you look around the world, because of westernization, breast cancer is going way, way, way up. And the soy story starts in the 1930s when isoflavones were discovered. And these are compounds in soy. They're in other plants too. And in the laboratory, you can show that they will attach to estrogen receptors. And that frightened people because they thought, oh my goodness sakes, this is going to be like stepping on the gas. It's going to cause breast cells to morph into cancer cells. It could cause a cancer cell to be promoted and to spread. So we should be avoiding tofu and avoiding soy milk. And that's how it all got started. And things went really crazy with the idea that soy will cause breast development in men. What men will sometimes refer to as man boobs. They get breast augmentation, and that's got to be from soy. However, the good news is that there has been more than enough time to study all of these things. Men who have breast development, which you'll see in a lot of heavyset men, what has happened is as they have gained weight, they've got more adipose tissue, more fat tissue. Fat cells turn testosterone and other androgens into female sex hormones. They convert male to females into female sex hormones. And that happens in a man's body, happens in a woman's body. So the more weight a man gains, the more estrogen is in his blood. And so he's actually got some, not just body fat there, he's got actual breast tissue. And it is not from eating miso soup, or tofu or any of that stuff. You see this in men on Western diets. No, but what's more important is what you asked, about women and breast cancer. There have been many studies looking not just at American women who tend not to eat very much soy, but looking at Asian women who sometimes eat heroic amounts of soy milk, tofu, tempeh, miso, natto, other things. And what they find is that soy products do influence the risk of breast cancer, but in exactly the opposite way that you'll read about on the internet, which is the scientific studies show very clearly that the women who consume the most soy products have about 30% less breast cancer compared to women who avoid soy. And then there was a big study in California that looked at women previously diagnosed with breast cancer. And they showed that if they ate more soy foods, they had about a 30% reduction in their likelihood of dying of the disease. So soy products do seem to affect our estrogen metabolism, but what they do is instead of stepping on the gas, they're stepping on the brake. They're slowing down the likelihood of your getting cancer. They're slowing down the likelihood of dying of it. So the well-intentioned but ill-informed oncologist who says to a woman who's had breast cancer, I don't think I'd eat soy if I were you, that's the worst advice you can give. The women who avoid soy have the highest mortality.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you dispelled that myth, because so many women fear soy for this reason. And, I don't know why it's been perpetuated for so long. And actually, on the other end of the spectrum, if you could kind of touch on how actually eating more animal products has been associated with higher rates of breast cancer.
Yes, you're right. And the real tragedy here is if you look at a country like Japan, back in the 1960s, you had a mostly plant-based diet. It was a rice-based, lots of rice, lots of noodles. If meat was consumed at all, it was little amounts used as kind of a flavoring for the rice and the noodles. And the cheese and ice cream were just not part of the diet at all. Then McDonald's set up shop in Tokyo, and fast food chains came in all over Japan. And then business lunches became meaty lunches, and the Japanese diet transformed. And on the heels of that, women whose diets did not westernize stayed healthy. They were the slimmest, longest lived people on the planet. But those women whose diets westernized, more meat, more dairy, started having approximately double the risk of breast cancer compared to other women. And with men, we started to see more overweight, more diabetes in men and women, higher rates of other kinds of cancers. Interestingly enough, more hair loss, baldness in men, that dermatologists started to think, what is going on hormonally in this country? And of course, it's not only Japan. The same thing has happened in China, and they are simply mirroring what happened in the United States in the middle of the 20th century. As our diet was getting cheesier and meatier, we had more and more and more breast cancer.
Wow. That's fascinating, because I think that, another big thing that I'm sure as soon as diets westernize too, that becomes a problem is processed foods. And even eating some of our processed junk food like French fries or Oreos, I always try to emphasize that even if it's abstaining from animal products, that alone may not be healthy. We really need to emphasize the fruits, vegetables, and things like that, because even some of our fried foods that are filled with trans fat and saturated fat, like, all sorts of fried foods from fried onion rings to everything can really be a huge issue in the westernization of certain cultures as well.
I think you're absolutely right. Now, to be fair, if you look in Japan, it's interesting. When they were at their absolute greatest longevity and best health, the rice they were eating was for the most part white rice. It was not brown rice. So you could say it's somewhat processed. On the other hand, fried foods were just not there. They weren't using trans fats really at all. And they weren't adding lots of fat of any kind. It was a very low fat, mostly plant-based diet. So nothing is perfect, but it was a good, largely plant-based diet. And similarly, when you compare even today, if you look at, say, people who follow a meaty diet versus a pescatarian diet versus a completely plant-based diet, the more we get toward a plant-based diet, the lower our cancer risk. And by the way, I should also mention that these are all part of the same phenomenon, that driving estrogen that caused cramps in the young woman I mentioned, or that caused fertility problems in the other woman who I described. It's that same biological haywire that ultimately leads to breast cancer risk. And so endometriosis and other things are also part of the same function. Fibroids, adenomyosis, all of these things are part of the same thing going wrong. And what that means is the same solution: a low-fat, healthy, high-fiber, as you say, non-processed plant-based diet, we're talking vegan, healthy vegan diet, that's really going to reduce the risk of all of these things. It would reduce the need for hysterectomy, reduce the need for fertility treatments, greatly reduce menopausal symptoms, we believe. It would be good all the way around.
And I love that you, in your book, you have a section in the breast cancer section, you have a section about testing the power of fruits and vegetables for cancer survival. So how important are fruits and vegetables in cancer fighting?
There was a huge study, 3,000 plus women, all of them had breast cancer. And it was called the Women's Healthy Eating and Living Study. It was run out of San Diego, but it's 7 different clinical sites. And the women all had breast cancer, and they were randomized into 2 groups, either an 8-a-day group, meaning have 8 servings of fruits and vegetables every day, plus fruit juices and so forth. And the control group was 5 a day, 5 vegetable and fruit servings. Now, as the study went on, the researchers were actually really troubled at first because it looked like both groups did pretty well. And what they were looking for is who has their cancer come back, and does a high vegetable and fruit diet protect you? Both groups did pretty well. And the first conclusion was, well, I guess it doesn't really matter if you have a lot of vegetables and fruits. But if you take another look at the data, what you discover is that going into the study, most of the women weren't eating much in the way of vegetables and fruits anyway. Americans just don't eat them much. So it turned out it didn't matter too much if you had 5 a day or 8 a day. Both of those were a lot by American standards. So boosting vegetables and fruits did turn out to be good. But they did another analysis that I thought was very telling. So some of the women who ate lots of vegetables and fruits, and they were physically active, they were models of taking care of themselves, their mortality in the follow-up period was less than 5%. Their likelihood of dying of their cancer. But then another group of women was not eating much vegetables and fruits, but they were still physically active. Their mortality was about double, because they were neglecting their vegetables and fruits. Then they found that the women who ate vegetables and fruits but never got any exercise, they had higher mortality too. But worst of all were the women who were neglecting vegetables and fruits and were not getting any exercise. Their mortality was around 11% compared to less than 5% for the women who did better. Let me say a particular shout out to cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kale, cauliflower. All of these foods trigger a beneficial change in the liver, which is to increase its vigilance for toxic chemicals. There are toxic chemicals in water, in the air. Your liver tries to get rid of them. And if you have cruciferous vegetables, your liver is more vigilant, better able to detoxify these chemicals and eliminate them.
And the exercise portion is interesting too. I know you touch on exercise and cancer in your book.
Yeah, it pays to sweat.
Yeah.
It does. Now, part of this is that exercise will tame hormones. It's really true. Now, I'm very big for, say, 45-minute brisk walk every day. But I got to tell you, I think when it comes to breast cancer, the more the better. The more we really get our heart beating, the better. Now, if a person has been sedentary, they've got to work their way up slowly. If they've got bad joints or a weak heart, certainly by all means talk to their caregiver before they run a marathon. But it really does pay to do whatever exercise you're able to do.
That's fantastic. And the last thing I want to touch on with breast cancer too is alcohol. I know you have a portion on alcohol and cancer, and I found this was interesting. I did not know the relationship there for breast cancer.
Yeah, I'm sorry to sound like a party pooper here, but I have to say, from a research standpoint, it is a clear slam dunk. Alcohol increases breast cancer risk. Even one drink a day, even a glass of organic red wine straight from Tuscany. If it's every day, it's going to increase the risk of breast cancer. Not a lot, but it does. And then 2 drinks, 3 drinks, it goes up from there. So there is no particularly safe level. Now,
so there's like a dose dependent kind of response.
Right. Exactly. If you have a little bit, it increases your cancer risk a little bit. To be specific about it, let's say we're talking about postmenopausal breast cancer, a drink every day, about a 13% increased risk.
Wow.
2 drinks a day, 2 glasses of wine a day, call it 26. It varies. It varies depending on the woman. It also varies depending on what else she eats. Folate is the B vitamin that's in in foliage, in green leafy vegetables. They have folate. Folate appears to repair DNA damage. Alcohol causes DNA damage. So what we think is going on is that when women eat a lot of green leafy vegetables, it could be that some of the risk from alcohol is neutralized. This is not a reason to go out on a big party bender and eat broccoli at the same time. But it may be that there is some risk neutralizing effect of the green vegetables. Stay tuned.
That's actually really interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's good to know. And then, you're not being a party pooper at all. Knowledge is power, and it's useful information for us to be able to provide for our patients, especially people who may be, of higher risk or may be worried about recurrence. So it's good to know and keep that, on, the foreground of our treatment and how we're evaluating this.
Yes.
So with regards to, additionally, you also touch on ovarian cancer, and this isn't something I'm very familiar with regards to lifestyle modification and ways you can modify your risk for ovarian cancer. And I thought this was fascinating. I was wondering if you could touch on that as well.
Yeah. People might remember Gilda Radner, who was on Saturday Night Live and just a beloved comedian. And she died young and died tragically with ovarian cancer. And it's one of these cancers where it's detected late. It's deep inside your body. You can't feel it until it's advanced quite a ways, and the mortality from it is really high. But an amazing new lead came from a researcher named Dan Kramer at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. He looked at different countries' diets, and he noticed an interesting pattern. First of all, starting not from ovarian cancer, but just ovarian malfunction, he noticed first that women's ovaries tend to run out of gas really quickly in Western countries, particularly where dairy products are consumed a lot. If you start, say, in Thailand is not a Western country. Women there are not drinking milk. Dairy is not a traditional Thai food. And if you looked at the change in fertility between, say, as a woman is in her 30s, the drop in fertility is not very much, maybe 25%, something like that. Compare that to the United States, where for an American woman in her 30s, between, say, age 30 to about 40, she's going to have about an 80% drop in fertility. So what Kramer did is he put on a graph many, many different countries, a couple of dozen countries, and found that the loss of ovarian function, the loss of fertility, just went right along with consuming dairy products. So what's that about? What he thought was it may not be the estrogen. It might not be the fat. It might not be the cholesterol. It might be the sugar. Now, there's a specific sugar, as you know, in milk products called lactose, which is not the same as table sugar. Lactose is made of glucose and galactose. Galactose, 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 comes out of the lactose sugar in your digestive tract, gets into the bloodstream, and it's toxic to the ovary. And there are very few foods that have galactose, but dairy is one of them. And if a person is lactose intolerant, as many people of color are, what that means is they don't have the enzymes that digest the lactose sugar, and they are the healthiest ones. If they are not consuming dairy products at all, because the dairy products give them a digestive upset and so forth. However, many people who are lactose intolerant are told, well, you can have dairy products, just have the lactose-free milk. They go to the store, they buy a carton of something called Lactaid or one of the other brands. And what it is the lactose sugar has been enzymatically broken apart by a chemical treatment so that there's just free galactose floating around in the milk, and they're drinking this galactose that is toxic to the ovary. So from Kramer's work suggesting that the milk sugar could damage the ovaries, others started looking specifically at ovarian cancer, and particularly in the Scandinavian countries where milk is consumed a lot, you see a stepwise increase. The more galactose is in your diet, meaning the more milk and dairy products are in your diet, the higher your risk of ovarian cancer. So we believe that the optimal amount of dairy in the diet is 0.
Wow. I see that here, you have in Sweden, where dairy products are especially popular, a study following 61,084 women over 13 years found the same result. Those with the highest dairy consumption had twice the risk of ovarian cancer compared to those who had the least. And other studies have confirmed milk drinking women have the highest risk of ovarian cancer compared to women who avoided it. It's really fascinating.
We're seeing the same with men, but now it's prostate cancer. 2 big Harvard studies showed that milk drinking men had much higher rates of prostate cancer compared to other men. So this is something that you've talked about before, and that's that milk is designed to help a calf grow, or if it's human milk, that helps the baby grow. But in every single species, the milk exposure period is very, very short. And as soon as the growing infant can consume solid food, there's no milk consumption by any species, at least in nature. And that's to the extent that we expose ourselves to it, we're asking for trouble.
Absolutely. And you have a few other things for ovarian cancer here that are fascinating. The dairy link is really interesting. For ovarian cancer, you say, so I do remember this from medical school, smoking is quite correlated. So higher smoking is higher risk of ovarian cancer, but alcohol less correlated.
Yes, exactly. Not a reason to drink though.
Okay, exactly. Absolutely. And then what about exercise? Do we know anything about exercise with ovarian cancer? Same kind of mechanism, which exercise kind of reduces risk for all disease, or is there nothing specific there?
I think we need more research there, but from my general feeling is that exercise generally gets estrogens in the range that we want them to be. So I think of it as a good kind of all-purpose thing to the extent that a woman is able to do it. Having said that, there are some people listening to this program who may not be able to exercise because of serious joint problems or massive obesity or whatever it is. We do whatever we can, but if you're not able to do meaningful exercise, diet changes themselves can be very, very helpful.
So that's a really good point. So, so I have a question. So with regards to some of this, I actually talk about, and I've been reading a lot lately about adipose tissue. I feel like we used to just kind of throw away it being just, we just think of fat as just fat. And now I'm thinking more of fat as an organ. Like you mentioned, it's secreting these hormones. And the more we have it, the more we're secreting hormones and cytokines that cause chronic inflammation. So I'm very interested in it from a cardiovascular standpoint, a heart failure standpoint, as you can imagine. The one thing I wonder is, has anyone looked at, and if anyone's going to know the data, it's going to be you, Neal, but has anyone looked at, like, if you're eating say an unhealthful standard American diet and you're not obese versus say someone is eating a plant-based diet, but they are obese. They still have an extensive amount of adipose tissue. Do you wonder if you're not reducing the risk fully unless you get your weight down to a healthful weight?
A healthy plant-based diet is always a good shift.
Of course.
To adopt a diet like that, it's always a good shift. However,
is that enough? I guess my question is it just, because I sometimes have patients who are following a healthy plant-based diet, but they've plateaued in weight loss. They've kind of, they still are, have a BMI above 30, et cetera. And I think of course, from so much of your research and the research I've read, I think a plant-based diet is one of the best ways and most helpful ways to lose weight. But do you think that is the diet itself, is eating just plants itself going to be protective from a hormonal standpoint, or should we aim to get our patients to weight loss too?
A plant-based diet is helpful, but I think it is not enough. In the sense that let's say a person has switched they were eating meat, now they're a vegan, and yet for whatever reason they're not losing weight, or they've lost weight but they've plateaued and they're still hovering with excess weight. Certain risks are higher. Obviously, cardiovascular risk and diabetes risk is going to be higher. The risk of postmenopausal breast cancer is going to be higher too. And so reducing body fat is going to help. And here's where I think we need to look at what might be perpetuating the problem. We do a lot of research studies where people come in. We always put them on a completely vegan diet. The animal products are gone. We keep oils really low, and we put everybody on a scale every week, and it's a digital scale, so we know exactly where their weight is. And what we'll find is if somebody hasn't lost weight for a couple of weeks in a row, your weight kind of goes up and down and up and down and up and down, but you look for the trend. If it's not dropping, we have to look at what could the contraband in the diet be. And if there are any animal products in there, of course, that's the first thing to eliminate. But oily foods will slow down weight loss too. So the person might say, it was that guacamole fest that we had last weekend or whatever, or a large amount of nuts and seeds or nut butters or cooking oils. Those kinds of things will slow down weight loss. And when a person tackles that part, then suddenly their weight starts to glide down again. And you'll discover that it's almost proportional to the amount of fat that's in their diet. But now let me say one other thing. What if you're really thin, but you're eating fatty foods and for whatever reason genetically you're just thin? There are people who still run into trouble with the greasy foods there. You see the fat getting into the muscle and liver cells, increasing the risk of type 2 diabetes, causing atherosclerotic changes that they might not be aware of. So fatty foods are a problem, even if the fats are quote unquote healthier fats than the animal fat.
So I have been doing a lot of deep diving into this with regards to plant-based fats, like not oils per se, although let me actually preface this with, to start with, one, I 100% agree with you. I feel like a lot of times with weight loss stall, because fat can be, even plant-based fats can be so calorically dense. How often is everyone measuring they're having 1 teaspoon of olive oil? I mean, it's so easy to consume 400 calories of olive oil. And so, often when my patients plateau as well, I'm like, are you actually tracking? Because in reality, it's so easy to overconsume calories and things that are high in fat. Fat itself, fat has, 9 calories per gram, so it's higher than carbohydrates and protein. I will say though, I've been trying to deep dive into some of the plant-based fats, chia, flax, avocado. I haven't found anything with mono and polyunsaturated fat being linked to anything like cancer or of course heart disease. So I'm wondering if there is a difference between whether it's, it's not just the fat molecule, but it's what it's packed with, because saturated fat that comes from animal protein, you're thinking about heme iron, you're thinking about, all the, AGEs, you're thinking about stimulating mTOR and IGF-1 and all these other things that come with that saturated fat. Whereas, things like chia, flax, kind of, high in omega-3s, anti-inflammatory, different, mono and polyunsaturated fats. I'm wondering if there is a difference there, although I haven't been able to find any data to show them being harmful.
Well, also, look at the quantity that you eat. Go into the nearest pizzeria and look at the 3/8 of an inch of yellow asphalt all over the top of a pizza, and how much of that ends into a person's body. And then you go into your vegan friend's kitchen and look at the chia seeds that go into their blender. It's a tablespoon, or something like it's not a huge or a quarter of a cup or whatever it is. It's not a lot. And the other thing is, I think you put your finger on something important, is what form are you having it in? If it's part of the actual whole food, then a certain amount of pulp and fiber will go along with it. Take an olive, for example. An olive has a little bit of fiber, a little bit of pulp. And if you pop an olive in your mouth, you're getting some olive oil, but you're getting everything that went along with it. If you buy a bottle of olive oil, even extra virgin olive oil, at the risk of sounding, I have to say, I think that that's really a processed food. And you could say, wait a minute, this came from Tuscany, it's organic. How can this be a processed food? The reason it's a processed food is you took 10,000 olives and you threw away all the pulp and all the fiber, and you're putting that oil in a bottle. And I don't care what beautiful label you put on it, it's still a highly processed food. And it's just like taking sugar out of sugar cane. You're taking oil out of the olive. So if you eat the whole olive, how many people ate 100 olives? They really don't.
That's a great point. It would be far more quantity. And I think that, it is important for us to look at, everything we're packaging it with too. If it's coming with, animal products are coming with hormones and things like that, whereas an avocado is just coming with more phytonutrients and things like that as well. One of the things I really was hoping for you to touch on, and then before we get to men's health and prostate cancer, is thyroid, because this is probably, everyone listening, this is going to hit home for them, because this is probably my most commonly asked question is regarding thyroid. One is, I was hoping we could go through just essentially thyroid hormones and the basic process of how it works. How does our thyroid work and what is it important for in our bodies? And then kind of touch on some thyroid diseases. And the number one myth that I get asked about even more than soy is I have hypothyroidism. I can't eat broccoli. I can't eat any cruciferous vegetables. And so I'm hoping we can get into all of that, starting with what does our thyroid do for us and why is it important?
Yeah, your thyroid is sort of the Clark Kent of human biology.
I love that.
It's this unassuming small organ. It's at the base of your neck. It's shaped like a butterfly. It's very innocent. And however, when it goes wrong, everything will go crazy. The thyroid gland really manages your energy, the energy of your cells, and even the energy that you feel. If your thyroid gland is not making enough thyroid hormone, your energy will slump. You'll start to gain weight. Your hair and skin will change their texture. Your mood will go a little bit south. If your thyroid gland goes into overdrive and is producing too much thyroid hormone, that's hyperthyroidism. It's the opposite. You can be overly energetic. You can be losing weight. You can have all kinds of problems. Worldwide, the reason that people have had their thyroids run out of gas is a lack of iodine. This is not really true in the United States, but worldwide, iodine is in the ocean. It's in sea plants. And of course, if you're on the shore of Japan, seaweed is, it's like everyday food. It also ends up in fish and whatever. But if you're in Nebraska, people might not be eating their wakame salad. And so people were getting, low in thyroid. And then in 1924, I think it was, the Morton Company said, we got the answer. We're going to put iodine in salt. And iodine then was in everybody's foods, and thyroid problems diminished to a great degree. However, we have a lot of thyroid problems still, but they're from a completely different source. They are autoimmune conditions. If you're low in thyroid, hypothyroid, that's typically Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Hashimoto was a Japanese physician who identified this condition, and what antibodies are is they are really protein torpedoes that are made to knock out some intruder in your body. Some virus has wandered into your bloodstream. Your body makes these antibodies to knock it out. A bacteria gets into your body. Your body makes more antibodies to knock it out. For some reason, in Hashimoto's thyroiditis, they're the common form of low thyroid. The body is making antibodies that end up damaging the thyroid. And they're putting the brake on the production of thyroid hormone. And then the opposite condition, hyperthyroidism or Graves' disease. By the way, Graves doesn't mean it's especially serious. It was named for Robert Graves, who was an Irish doctor. These antibodies are now stimulating the overproduction of thyroid hormone. So what this all comes to is, what is it that's causing these torpedoes to form? Because if we can get that out of our bodies, maybe the thyroid will get back into balance. And the short answer is we don't entirely know. However, in your body in balance, I described many cases of people who changed their diets. One is a neurosurgeon from North Carolina who I ran into, and he told me his story. He had hypothyroidism for about 5 years. His doctor he said, you've been neglecting this. You need thyroid replacement. And he said, well, let me try a diet change. He went on a totally plant-based diet, and his thyroid hormones went back into normal balance. And we've seen this again and again and again and again, leading to a theory. And I want to call it a theory because I don't think we have enough research on this. The theory is that you're consuming particularly protein foods that are recognized in the body as foreign. Dairy proteins, perhaps other animal proteins. Our body makes antibodies to attack them, and those antibodies end up damaging the thyroid. And you don't take this on faith. If you've got hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism, in addition to whatever other treatments you may be having, try a completely healthy plant-based diet. Some people will also get away from gluten, although I'm not convinced that that's always essential. But what they discover is that their thyroid their need for thyroid hormone just goes way, way down. Or if they haven't started it yet, their TSH level, which is how we're monitoring their thyroid function, just resolves. And they feel better, and they're suddenly able to lose weight, and their skin and hair get back to normal, and they feel good again.
That's fascinating. I hope PCRM I hope you guys do a study on this. It would be really interesting to see cause I think there's something to it as well. Anecdotally, I've seen some patients with all different kinds of autoimmune disease improve on a whole food plant-based diet. So it would be super interesting to see if you guys end up studying this, cause it's definitely a hot topic.
Let's say a word about that, because what you've seen is what we've seen too, is there's a broad range of autoimmune conditions. The classic one is rheumatoid arthritis.
Right.
And I know you've seen many people where they stop dairy or they stop all animal products and their joints start to feel good again. There's a lot of variability, and not everyone gets better, but many do. And then Sjogren's disease, which is where the eyes and the mouth get very dry, or asthma. There are many, many other conditions like this where when people get to a really clean diet, these conditions improve. So I would strongly encourage people, whatever their condition, there's never a contraindication to a healthy plant-based diet.
100%. And this is where I actually want you to hammer this home, because the biggest concern I get regards to people who are hypothyroid that are on Synthroid, their biggest concern is they cannot eat too many plants. Like, they cannot eat too many plant products because of this concern of goitrogens, because this is a concern that cruciferous vegetables will cause an issue with their thyroid. Is this true? Like, do our hypothyroid patients have to limit the amount of green leafy vegetables and broccoli and things like this they're having, or is that just an old wives' tale?
Frankly, I think we need more work on this. The cruciferous vegetables have been talked about. Soy has been talked about, millet or cassava, some of these other things. And what we do know, that probably the worst thing you could say about them is that if you're taking Synthroid or other thyroid replacement, if you take it along with these foods, or frankly any other foods, they're less effective. Because you're going to absorb, you know that certain medications should be taken on an empty stomach.
Exactly.
Thyroid hormone is one of those. However, we have seen people who have reversed their hypothyroidism while eating a lot of cruciferous vegetables. And I suspect there is nothing to it at all. I think you can have these foods. One thing should be said, that the cruciferous vegetables, in my view, should typically be eaten cooked. There are people who will have a raw kale salad and so forth. Some people have made a case that if you cook them, you'll eliminate some kind of natural toxins that the plant had in it as it was growing. Whether that's really a significant issue or not, we don't know. By the way, while we're at it, can I just say one thing for the person on blood thinners? They're taking Coumadin. And so they say, well, Dr. Bellardo, thanks for recommending a plant-based diet, but I can't have all these vegetables because I'm on a blood thinner. First of all, vegetables are healthy. You really don't want to limit them. All you need to do is make sure that the amount of the vegetables you eat is the same. Keep it constant from day to day. Then you'll get on your Coumadin dose and you're going to be fine. And of course, your doctor may well switch you to a different blood thinner. There are others that are on the market now. But no, you should definitely not limit the green vegetables in your diet.
100%. This is something I see all of the time. Obviously in cardiology, I'm seeing patients that have to be on warfarin because they have a mechanical valve and we're not able to switch them to a NOAC. And so I see all the time CT surgeons will, and not to blame them, but the patient will come to me saying, my surgeon said I cannot have green leafy vegetables, 0 chance, I'm on Coumadin. And I always dispel that misconception as well, as long as they're eating the same amount and we are tracking their INR. It can be done safely. Everything affects warfarin metabolism, Coumadin metabolism as well, including if a patient doesn't eat. So in general, eating, no matter what you're eating, needs to stay consistent when you're on a blood thinner. And I always mention that, just working with your provider to make sure they know if there has been a change in your diet, a positive change in your diet, like going plant-based, just make sure sure that you're monitored frequently. And then things, as long as you're eating the same amount every day, there should be no issue. I definitely find that people get nervous about that as well.
But if you follow that advice and you don't eat your vegetables, you're missing all the antioxidants.
Oh, absolutely.
And the
absolutely.
antioxidants, that's not just a word. The antioxidants are in your bloodstream. They're stabilizing the LDL particles to keep your arteries healthy. So you need those. Back on thyroid, just real quick. If a person is listening to this thinking, my parents had thyroid disease, what do I need to do? The two things that I would say is, first of all, get to know sea vegetables. Now, I grew up in North Dakota. That was not our thing. But it's a good idea to bring them into your diet, whether it's the nori that's wrapped around a sushi roll. And I'm not talking fish sushi. I'm talking about a cucumber roll or an asparagus roll or sweet potato roll. The nori or the wakame that's used in the seaweed salad or in your miso soup. It's a neat thing to open the door to foods that the rest of the world has been pioneering for a long time and take advantage of them. Those foods are going to give you iodine. That's good for you. If you're not using them, then at home your salt should be iodized because restaurant salt typically is not. So that's step one. Make sure you got iodine. Step two, healthy plant-based diet because that's going to knock out the parts of the diet that could contribute to an autoimmune attack.
That's such a great point, especially because of the iodine, because, the concern with eating cruciferous vegetables, with eating spinach or Brussels sprouts or broccoli, the concern is that they could limit your thyroid's uptake of iodine. So,
yes,
and so if you're eating enough iodine, it's a non-issue. Yeah. So it's very important.
Yes. What you said is important. Where those foods have been indicted, it's in areas where they have very marginal iodine intake. And the concern is, okay, you're having a huge amount of these foods that end up displacing or eliminating the ability of the thyroid to use that iodine. So there aren't lots and lots of dietary sources, but it's neat to take advantage, particularly of sea vegetables. I think they're a great addition to the diet.
That's such a great point. Definitely overlooked. I myself have definitely overlooked them as well. I think that's really interesting. So, switching gears to men's health and prostate cancer, you have a really, really interesting discussion about how different dietary factors can be affected in prostate cancer. And one thing I wanted to touch again was soy with men. I know it's you went through this mechanism, but men are so scared with regards to everything from estrogen production that soy intake is going to affect with prostate cancer. But I'd love for you to touch on that as well.
Yes. And it comes up particularly because cow's milk has been indicted very, very, very clearly. So men think, should I switch to soy? The first thing to do is to definitely get away from dairy products. Many, many studies have shown that men who avoid cow's milk product have a great reduction in their likelihood of getting prostate cancer. And we believe it's because dairy products trigger the release of IGF-1 or insulin-like growth factor in the bloodstream, which if you mix IGF-1 with prostate cells in the test tube, they just grow like crazy. Same with breast cancer cells. In addition, the cow's milk products goof up our vitamin D action in the body, and that may play a role in cancer risk too. But if you switch to soy, no, soy does not drive prostate cancer. If anything, it has the opposite effect. It can reduce the risk. Partly, it may be some function of the soy. It may be just the fact that it's replacing cow's milk products. Other things are protective. Of the lycopene story. Tomatoes and watermelons and pink grapefruit have that wonderful red pigment called lycopene. Lycopene is an antioxidant, more powerful than beta carotene, and men who have reddish tomato products, watermelon products, pink grapefruit, any of these reddish pigments in their diet on a regular basis have maybe about 30-35% less risk of developing prostate cancer. Oddly enough, that's even true if it's cooked. In fact, it may be even more true if it's cooked. The cooking process seems to liberate the lycopene. Even if it's pizza sauce, even if it is ketchup, that lycopene is helpful for the man's prostate. But don't put the ketchup on a burger because then you're going to have lots more problems.
Wow, that's really interesting. So lycopene. Any other big nutrients that make a big difference for prostate cancer?
Well, when you put it all together with a plant-based diet in general, which does have the lycopene, which tomatoes are in the fruit group, and soy, of course, is in the legume group or the bean group, adding the vegetables and the grains, you've got a plant-based diet. Dean Ornish did an elegant study. After he became famous for reversing heart disease, he then set his sights on prostate cancer. And he brought in almost 100 men. They all had prostate cancer. Half of the men were asked to go on a completely plant-based diet, a vegan diet, low-fat, healthy. The other group was in just untreated control. And as time went on, what the researchers tracked was PSA, or prostate-specific antigen. It's just a blood test that shows how your prostate's doing. And normally, when men have prostate cancer, the doctor and the patient eagerly watch their PSA level gradually rising. And there's, as long as it doesn't rise too fast, we don't have to recommend surgery. Well, what happened was in the control group, the people who got no treatment, their PSA rose as it does in men with prostate cancer. But in the people that went on the completely plant-based diet, it didn't rise. In fact, it actually started to fall on average, meaning that somehow that this cancerous process was being reined in to a degree. And in the course of a year, none of the men needed to have any kind of treatment for their cancer. Now don't get me wrong. Cancer is a serious thing. You want to be careful. You want to watch it. And you want to have whatever treatments are indicated. However, the most important thing that we do every single day is choose foods. So yes, have soy. Yes, have lycopene-rich foods. But what you should really have is the bounty of plant foods. Get rid of the animal products. Take your B12, and you're going to have a healthy prostate.
That's amazing. And it's so interesting, isn't it, how the same diet works for all these different disease processes. So everything we're looking at, it's really universal. So eating more plants and eating more whole foods really does help in most of the disease processes we see on a day-to-day basis. And I love that you even touch on your book on mood. This is something that I get asked quite often, and it's totally out of my scope. And I love that you discuss mood and nutrition. And I think this is fascinating, if you don't mind delving into that a bit.
We discovered this really almost as an accident. We were doing a study with Geico, the car insurance company.
Yeah.
And the reason that happened was their office is 4 blocks from my office. So I was talking with their health director, and we decided to do a study at Geico. And the purpose of the study was to help people lose weight, and if they had diabetes, to improve their diabetes. So we used a plant-based diet for that reason. Along the way, we used a number of questionnaires to just track how people's adjustment was. What was their mood like? Did they have anxiety? How often did they miss work? And what we found was really striking. We found that depression got better. Anxiety got better. People were at work more often. The absenteeism went way, way down. And I should mention, by the way, that the first study was done here on the East Coast, but the second Geico study was done in 10 different cities, including Macon, Georgia, Dallas, Texas, Buffalo, New York, San Diego, California. And the reason I emphasize that is that some people will say, yeah, sure, you can do your vegan diet in Bethesda, Maryland, or New York, but we're not going to do it here in Georgia. People will do it anywhere. People can and want to be healthy no matter where they are. You might have black beans in one part of the world and pinto beans in another and black-eyed peas in another. People have ways of interpreting it in their own ways, but they can. And we found this, but other research teams independently, Bonnie Biesel's group in the Midwest, started using plant-based diets specifically for mood disorders and discovered that you do seem to see a benefit. Now, I think we need more work on this. But my goal, what I would like to do, is to pair it with the exercise data. You have seen these studies where if you get people's hearts beating, they may not want to exercise because they're depressed. They feel rotten. But you get them with a group of people, and you go out either running or you get on a treadmill or whatever you can do. Get your heart beating and do it every day. What you see is that life's problems haven't changed, but your ability to tolerate things and to handle them just gets better and better and better. And so what I think needs to be studied is the combination of a healthy, well-balanced plant-based diet along with regular exercise. And my guess is that it would be similar or better than typical antidepressant medications.
That would be really, really interesting. That would be a really great study. I know that you guys have probably a ton on the cusp happening with regards to PCRM. So I hope that you guys can facilitate that, because that would be interesting. Antidepressants, although incredibly important, and I never minimize their importance in regards to an acute period, and some patients do benefit from them. And I always recommend everyone listening, see your provider, and, antidepressants can definitely help in certain circumstances. But overall, the data for them, they don't have 100% effectiveness. So clearly, I actually don't know. It's probably lower than that. You would probably know that. Do you know how effective they are?
Well, if you take a large group of people and you put them on an antidepressant. And by the way, first of all, let me underscore what you said. Depression it can be serious. It can be fatal. Suicide is a real risk. So we don't want to take these things lightly. However, when we use typical antidepressants, what we see are a couple things. First of all, about a third of people get noticeably better. Another third don't get anything at all. And then there's a third group in there where they get somewhat better, but we're not sure that they wouldn't have gotten better anyway. The other thing we see is lots and lots and lots and lots of side effects from them. So I agree with you. I think there is definitely a role for them, but just because a person is using a medication doesn't mean that you can't choose a healthy breakfast. Now, I should be clear about maybe what a healthy diet is, because when we talk about getting away from animal products and so forth, it's not as if there's one just single way of doing this. And I think of a vegan diet as not the ultimate end. I think it was kind of the beginning. Think, okay, I'm not going to eat animal products anymore. What am I going to do? So, for me, rule number one is vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans. Have a variety of those 4 groups. And then make sure you have B12, vitamin B12, on a regular basis. And then I made a pitch for sea vegetables. I like to add them in some way. And if you're not doing that, have iodized salt, so you're covering your iodine. And then, what you mentioned, let's be unprocessed. So if you're going to just cook up some simple spinach and other vegetables, as opposed to having them in lots of sugary, gooey sauces and things, gravitating towards simple whole foods is a plus too. And now you're talking about a regimen that is delicious and healthy and clean, but also really, really, really good from the standpoint of hormone balance.
That's perfect. That makes sense. And this same, as you're balancing hormones, this same dietary pattern helps to reduce risk for diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, all these other cancers, all these other disease processes. So it's all related.
Now, I can talk about food but I have, the only reason I can is I personally am all thumbs in the kitchen. But in this particular book, For Your Body in Balance, I worked with Lindsay Nixon, who writes wonderful, wonderful cookbooks. I was very glad that she helped me to turn these principles into pizzas and wraps and noodle dishes, and even the occasional chocolate cupcake is in there, so that people can say, yes, these are simple, healthy foods, but they look familiar, they look tasty. And if you don't mind my mentioning this just really quickly, when Lindsay sent me these, this set of recipes, which are just great, she also sent me a note which said, I did not realize that she had terrible, terrible menstrual cramps earlier on. And that when she went to a completely plant-based diet and got her body in balance, that she discovered that pain went away. And she realized there is really something to these hormone dialing effects that foods have. And so our goal is to get this word out and get it into other people's hands.
I love that so much. So your book, which is incredibly, very well-rounded, it covers hormones in every aspect of the body. You have how many recipes attached to the book from Lindsay?
Oh, that's a good question.
There's a lot.
Yes, several dozen. I'm going to say somewhere around 60 or so.
Amazing. Tons of recipes. And when does your book come out?
February 4th. And I'm hoping that people will take it, and I'm hoping they'll take it and they'll put a Post-it note inside it for whatever condition a loved one has, and share it with them, because the people who need this message the most may not even realize that there is a solution to the problems they're having.
That's actually a really good point. And just to kind of close the circle here. So we pretty much talk about your book covers. We didn't cover everything, but you really, just so everyone knows that's looking for a deep dive into hormones and plant-based nutrition and how plant-based nutrition can help balance. Dr. Barnard's book covers everything from fertility, cramps, PMS, tackling cancer for women, tackling cancer for men, PCOS, menopause, and then back to men, he talks about erectile dysfunction, diabetes for both men and women, healthy thyroid, healthy skin and hair, and foods that fight depression, anxiety, things like that, how to start a healthy diet, and different recipes that are included from his partner Lindsay there in the book. And so really there's something in there for almost everyone at multiple different stages of life. So it comes out February 4th. When can everyone start pre-ordering? Oh,
you can pre-order now. I hope people will do. Yes, it's on Amazon and all the online sites. And if you have a local bookstore near you, they'd appreciate your support too. So anyway, Your Body in Balance is there, and I hope it's a delicious prescription for people.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. And tell everyone where they can find you and how they can follow you and what the work you're doing at PCRM.
Well, thank you so much. At the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, we're at pcrm.org. We have lots of events that people can participate in. We have downloadable Kickstart on your iPhone and Android. It's all free. And I'm hoping that doctors and patients will be able to work together to build a healthier world.
And I will say, Dr. Barnard, I've said this to you once before, and I'll keep saying it. PCRM, for anyone listening, if anyone's listened to this podcast even once before, I've mentioned PCRM. I pretty much mention it in every single episode, because PCRM is one of my favorite resources to refer not only healthcare providers, but also patients. Your Kickstart is fantastic. And the amount of resources that are on PCRM.org are limitless. And you pretty much address every question, concern that there is for nutrition and disease. So I really have to plug PCRM for all the work they do for health and to educate us as providers, but also for patients. Very patient friendly and fantastic resource.
Well, let me return the compliment. You, Dr. Bellardo, have done so much work taking really important and difficult topics, but you've made them simple and understandable, and you've shared them with so many physicians that we work with, but also so many lay people who really need answers. You've inspired them, you've educated them, and I really, really appreciate all that you have done to make the world healthier.
Oh, thanks, Neal. We're all a good team. We're all rooting for you guys listening to have you get this book, and it's really helpful it's actually, to be honest, everyone should pre-order. I think it's a great gift too for any family members you have with any of these struggling with these diseases. Well, thank you so much, Neal. I thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We loved having you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.